So I think we're like lots of people in this country at the moment. And the really interesting thing about this debate is it cuts right across party political lines. You've got Dennis Skinner and Nigel Farage on one side, and you've got Tony Blair and George Osborne on the other. That's fascinating, isn't it? And we've never had a situation like this. Well, maybe. But I think, what divides us really, the Leave campaign cares passionately about sovereignty and democracy, and is prepared to take a little bit of a gamble on the economic situation in order to leave. The Remain campaign seems to be all about economics and fear of economically what will happen to us if we go. And they're telling us that we'll enjoy more economic stability in Europe. Well, like most people, I've never really had a crystal clear understanding of exactly how the institutions in Europe work. And like most people, I've been trying to inform myself over the last few weeks. Now, I did train as a lawyer years ago and practiced for a bit. I've never read anything quite as turgid as the European treaties, but I've tried to read them in the last fortnight. The treaties of Rome, Maastricht, and Lisbon. And they have confirmed, in my view, that we ought to leave for reasons I'll set out in a minute. Broadly speaking, there are two issues at stake here. One is economics and one is sovereignty. I'm not voting on the economic issue for this reason, that the economists have got everything wrong in recent decades as far as I can see. They told us that we should be in the ERM in the early 90s, then they told us that we should be in the euro in the early part of this century. And all of that turned out to be wrong. The European Union itself is no great respecter of economists. There are strict criteria for countries joining the euro in the first place. But Greece and Italy got in, so I read, by a trick, by a sleight of hand. They were lent more money than they had in order to meet those criteria. The EU wanted them in the euro despite their own criteria, and now they're reaping what they sow because Greece can't devalue. So it's a wretchedly suffering country because it's in the euro. And the laws of economics were completely disregarded in their case. So I'm also aware of the fact that we've just been through one of the biggest financial crashes ever, and the economists didn't predict that. Did one major economist predict it? No. And when you think about it, the reason for that crash was that bad loans were being divided up and sold in disguise as something else. Well, when it comes to the science of economics, I can't think it's the equivalent of rocket science to have worked out that that was going on, and yet they did not work out that was going on. So I don't put much faith in the dire predictions of the economists. Sovereignty is what interests me. The EEC began the best intentions as a free trade union in the 1950s. It was designed to stop war happening again. I think we can all applaud that initial objective. The opening words of the Treaty of Rome are determined to establish the foundations of an ever closer union among the European peoples. That's what the architects wanted. They were unashamed about it, and they still are. But they wanted a federal Europe to happen gradually. I saw one of the architects on YouTube the other night. He said they thought it would happen within 10 years because they thought it would be obvious to the peoples of Europe that that's what they all wanted. Well, I don't think there's any denying that the European project is moving in a federal direction. Is it a bad thing? That's the question. That's what's deciding my vote. Is that a bad thing? And I've decided that it is, and there are two principal reasons for this. One is in the area of justice, which interests me in particular. The Supreme Court in Europe is the European Court of Justice. It's our Supreme Court. It is supreme over our British Supreme Court. In Britain, traditionally, we've had separation of powers. The judiciary doesn't trespass on what our Parliament does. If the law is unclear, the Supreme Court bats it back to Parliament and asks it to legislate. That's not the tradition in Europe. They have a rather different way of doing things. They're far more used to what we call judicial activism, judges deciding what the law is. And every time I go and look at what's happening in European law, what I see is that the European Court of Justice is becoming a mini legislature in its own right. And under the recent Lisbon Treaty, its powers are extended. There's something called the Charter of Fundamental Rights in that Lisbon Treaty, which accords far more power to the European Court. So effectively, anything that's within the scope of European law, which has its origins in European law, becomes the preserve of the European Court of Justice. And one of the interesting things about that is we can't predict what those areas are going to be. There's no list of precise areas. The court makes it up as it goes along. So there's been a recent case in Sweden, and I'm sorry if this sounds boring. It's a problem with the Europe issue. It is quite turgid and boring and all in small print, and none of us ever really get to understand it, do we? A recent case in Sweden called Franson. It's a domestic dispute about VAT law in Sweden, about interpretation of Swedish statutes. It's gone up to the European Court, and they have decided that because VAT stems from the European directive, which says that member states will charge VAT, they have jurisdiction ultimately over this issue. Not even the Swedish Parliament thought that the European Court had jurisdiction over that issue. And this is happening increasingly in all sorts of areas, in social and administrative law, and even in our criminal justice system. Increasingly, our courts are finding that they no longer are the ultimate arbiters of the law. Well, you could say that's fine, and broadly speaking, the European Court operates justly, but that removes us from the equation. Who appoints these judges in Europe? I mean, they're all paid €250,000, by the way, far more than our domestic judges. They're appointed by our government in closed rooms. I couldn't name a single judge in the European Court. I had to go and look up who our British ones. Can we get rid of them? No, we can't. Can we influence them in any way? No, we can't. They're remote, and that worries me considerably. And another thing that worries me is that we have increasing harmonisation of areas of our law, like criminal justice. We've heard a lot about the European arrest warrant. It's been sold to us as a good thing. We can get people back to our country who fled to Europe. But when you look at it the other way, if the authorities in Spain want to arrest you, they just have to issue a warrant, and off you go to Spain. There's no due process anymore in this country. There's no extradition hearing where the other European country has to present a prima facie case and convince a judge that there's sufficient evidence to send you away. You just go because a warrant has been issued for your arrest. Well, that I can't see any argument against the fact that that makes us a federal state in terms of arrest, all right? Because we don't have the protection of the British extradition proceedings any longer. And that just appears to be the gradual direction of travel. Bit by bit by bit by bit, European law seems to encroach upon ours. And where our European legislation comes from also worries me. We've got an MEP here later. I'd like to ask him a couple of questions. We all know it encroaches on our lives. We can't name these European statutes, but we know we can't get a window cleaner who'll climb a ladder anymore because Europe says that can't happen. But we have no leverage. You and I don't really have any ability to influence European legislation. And I had to go back and double check this several times to see if I got it straight. And I think this is it. This is how it works in Europe. There's an unelected commission, 10,000 or so civil servants, who propose and draft all legislation. They then consult the 28 commissioners who are appointed by the 28 member states. There's further consultation with the Council of Ministers, who are ministers from the member states, who are elected in that they're elected representatives of member states. And when that legislation has been drafted by these unelected people, it's then put to our MEPs for approval. The MEPs can't initiate legislation. It's all initiated by unelected civil servants. There are 751 MEPs, by the way, which I worked out is one for every 700,000 of us in Europe, which is quite interesting. So, is it a democratic system? No, it isn't, not by any recognisable standard. But what really worries me is that right in the middle of Europe, there are these 28 commissioners. I've gone away and tried to research them. They're quite an opaque bunch. Right? So each country nominates a commissioner who serves 5 or 10 years. They run the commission. So they really are in charge of drafting this legislation. They are where it originates. That's where the power seems to lie. Our commissioner's called Lord Gill. Well, none of us had ever heard of him until recently. I went and looked up his CV. He's never held elected office. As a young man, he started out as a parliamentary researcher and advisor. He then went into the PR business. He was an advisor to Kenneth Clarke and then John Major. He got a CBE for helping out in the Maastricht negotiations. He got a peerage, then became leader of the House of Lords, and then was appointed our man in Brussels, never having held elected office in his life. Jeremy Paxman put it to it, have you even been a parish councillor? No, he said. So, he's on a basic salary of £200,000 a year plus expenses, so very nice. Chauffeur-driven limousines in the hotel. That's fine, but he's in charge, or he is the commissioner with responsibility for financial stability. So he deals with finance and financial services. And this is another boring but opaque bit of the EU at the moment. The Commission is currently negotiating this massive free trade deal with the United States, TTIP it's called. I forget exactly what it stands for, but it's the biggest free trade deal that will ever be negotiated in the history of the planet. It seems to create a free trade area between Europe, 520 million people, and the USA, 311 million people. So the fat end of 1 billion people will be covered by it. An enormous marketplace. Lord Hill is our man in Brussels, dealing with the financial services end of that. He's meeting bankers every day, I checked that on the website. And he's in charge of trying to draft the rules that are going to harmonise the banking system, the merchant banking system, between Europe and the USA. I can't think of anything more important politically in the world at the moment. But it's in the hands of a man we don't know, we haven't elected, we can't communicate with. I couldn't find his contact details on the internet. We haven't got a phone number there, or even an email address on the European website. And this is all being done behind our backs. And if this agreement comes into force, as is currently proposed, it's fascinating what's proposed actually. There will be a system of rules governing free trade between Europe and the USA, and that the big businesses that will benefit from this will have a say in amending these rules from time to time. And if they're deemed to be too prejudicial, they will be amended, again without consultation with us. And if a national parliament legislates in contradiction of any of these rules, for example, if TTIP allows the use of certain pesticides and we in Britain say, no, we don't want to use that anymore, so we'll legislate against it. Well, the company that has been selling that in Britain at that point will be allowed to sue the British government in what's called a parallel court, in a commercial court set up for the process, for compensation to be paid by us, the British taxpayer, for the profits they would have made had we not legislated to ban it. Alright, so it's a very the interests field of very large businesses with very large vested interests. Fine, we need large businesses, but also you and I need to have the right to have some influence on the law that governs them. It's the objective of business to employ people and to make a profit. It's the duty of government to make sure that happens fairly. And it's the right of us, the electorate, to be able to make sure the government does its job right and to kick them out if they don't. And my fundamental concern about Europe is that we have no right, no ability to kick these people who are making these enormous laws out. We can't get rid of laws, though. We can't even communicate with them. So for that reason, that absolutely clinches it for me. I mean, if I was asked to opt into this system as it currently stands, there is no way I could possibly vote for it. I also passionately believe, and have to say this, that this European issue has nothing whatever to do with race, or indeed with our affection for our European neighbours. We all feel hugely affection towards our European neighbours. We want peace, stability, we want free trade. But we don't want it on these terms, and we don't want backroom stitch-ups between unaccountable politicians and big business. So I'm rather hoping that we vote to leave, and I'm rather hoping that that will have a knock-on effect, and it might actually be the best thing that ever happened to Europe, because finally it might say we need to really address the fundamentals of what we're doing. There we go.
He said he's not a politician. With speeches like that and that clarity of thought, I think it could well do with you, especially if you come out of the EU. Our second speaker is co-founder of mine, Tom Pursglove. We set up Grassroots out sometime last year now, and with Kate Coey, the Labour Member of Parliament for Vauxhall. Shortly after that, we were endorsed by Nigel Farage and UKIP. Before Tom was elected to Parliament last year, before he was elected, he was Chief Executive of Stuffer Wind Farms. No, sorry, I haven't got that right. It's Together Against something, together. But you get the gist. He is the youngest Conservative Member of Parliament. He overturned a 7,500 Labour majority into a 2,500 Conservative majority, the biggest swing in the country. We did it by taking the Conservative Party's central office plan and implementing it. No, we didn't. We took it through another way and concentrated on what their people were actually concerned about. And what we campaigned on in Corby, East Northamptonshire, two things. We campaigned to come out of the EU, and we campaigned on controlling immigration. And that's why we went from 7,500 Labour to 2,500 Conservative. I give you my good friend, Tom Pursglove MP.
Thank you, Peter, for that very kind introduction. It probably is a little bit ironic, isn't it, that somebody who's gone on to be a Member of Parliament was the Chief Executive of an organisation called Together Against Wind, given that my current place of work is probably the venue in the country where the most hot air is dispensed day in, day out. But it really is great to be here. As you can see, Peter and I have brought the weather with us today. Pretty horrendous, actually. Terrible. It rained as we came in. So hopefully when we leave, we'll take the rain with us and you will be relieved of all of that water that we've seen in the last few hours. But I really just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for everything that you've been doing in the last few weeks and months. This is such an important referendum campaign. We're now less than 2 weeks to go until we have our opportunity to take our country back. And it is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. We simply cannot afford to get this wrong. This will not come round again. And, lots of people try to take credit for this referendum. I think UKIP and Nigel Farage have a claim to make. I think that the Conservative rebels who voted a few years ago, the 81 Conservative rebels who voted to get that referendum in place, put pressure on the government to deliver it, is also very important in all of that. But I also think it's the people who, for so many years, when it was very unfashionable to call for a referendum, let alone to say that you wanted to vote to leave, should be very, very proud that we got this vote on the 23rd of June, because it's all of your historic efforts that have got us to this point and have allowed us to have this historic vote that we are currently engaging in. So a huge thank you to you for everything that you've done over the years, and thank you for everything that you've been doing in the last few weeks to try and get us out of the European Union. I also want to say a big thank you to Davies, your local Member of Parliament. I think you're incredibly lucky in this part of the world to have a Member of Parliament who is principled, who puts his constituents first, who is very clear about where he stands. I enjoyed David's company in the tea room. We had a good chat at lunchtime yesterday, didn't we, where we were sat with a few of the relatively well-known Remain figures like Anna Super, so we thought it would be good to talk about how strong our counties are, didn't we, David? And it was good to make that point, that people in our areas were getting out, knocking on the doors, delivering the leaflets, spreading the Leave message, and doing all of that important work. One of the interesting things, I've been in the House of Commons now for 12 months, it's an enormous privilege to be able to stand up and ask questions on behalf of your constituents to the Prime Minister, to be able to represent local people in that great forum of national debate. People all over the world look to as being a democracy that they wish to emulate. But one of the things that comes with that, being a young MP, is you often get asked to do these interviews, these magazine-type interviews, where they want to know what album you've got in your car, what music you listen to when you're at home, what you like to drink at the weekend, what you like to get up to on a Saturday night. But one question that I was asked a few weeks ago was a really straightforward question, actually. And it was, do I think it's more important to have a Conservative majority government in 2020, or do I think it's more important to win this referendum? And the answer is so simple, because although I believe passionately, different people in this room will have different thoughts as to whether a Conservative majority government is a good thing. I happen to believe that it is. But actually, the fact is, if you haven't got your democracy, it doesn't really matter very much whether it's a UKIP government, a Labour government, a Conservative government, a coalition, because you need to have control of your democracy, lock, stock and barrel. And that is the choice on the ballot paper on the 23rd of June. That is the centrepiece choice that we have. But there's other things on the ballot paper as well that matter very, very much. And the first of those is on immigration. At the moment, we do have uncontrolled immigration from within the European Union, and people across the country are worried about that. The consequences for our public services, the number of people coming in to our country. Net migration last year ran at over 1/3 That is unsustainable. But actually, the biggest concern that I have about immigration is that in this country that's grounded on fairness, we have a discriminatory immigration system. We do not treat people equally from across the world. If you come from Australia, if you come from the United States, if you come from the Indian subcontinent, you are treated differently than if you come from the European Union. And what brought that home to me, how bad this is, was as a local MP, I visited a small firm in Corby, it employs 6 people. This visit was just before Christmas. And I met a young man there who'd come across from New Zealand. He was being trained by this firm, he was doing really well. They want to sell more products to the Australian and New Zealand market. They want to engage in that market. Great product they're producing, and they were hoping that he would be the link into that market. But because he's from New Zealand, we couldn't get his visa renewed, and so he's had to go back. But if he'd been from within the European Union, we wouldn't have had that problem. If he'd been low-skilled from the EU, we wouldn't have had that problem. And I just think that there is nothing fair about an immigration system that turns people away who are skilled, who want to do the right thing, and who we need in our country. So for me, the immigration question, and often the Remain people like to characterise that we're all nasty people who all want to stop immigration, full stop, it couldn't be further from the truth. What I want is an immigration system that treats people equally, regardless of where they come from in the world. The second thing is we hear lots and lots and lots about £350 million a week, we hear about 377 million, we hear about 300 million, but actually it's a bit of a sideshow now, because whatever the contribution is, whatever the subscription is, look at the indirect costs as well. The £1 billion a year that we give to President Juncker's slush fund, the £1 billion a year that we give to the EU bank, the money that is spent on our civil service processing EU legislation and EU diktat. So actually, we hear about 350 million, 377 million, 300 million, whatever the number, actually the cost of the European Union is much, much higher to the British taxpayer. And what's been really frustrating for me is that as a backbench MP, I've been asked to vote for some really difficult spending cuts in recent months. Really difficult stuff. We saw more of it in the budget. But the one thing that the Chancellor didn't stand up and say in his budget statement, and it was snuck out in the Red Book, is that at the same time that we were making these very difficult decisions about public spending in this country, our contribution to the European Union, but this year alone, was going up by £2.6 billion. How can that be right? I believe very strongly that we ought to take back control of that money and we ought to spend it on our own police, on our own schools, on our own hospitals. And yes, I do think that we ought to be doing more by our armed forces. So let's spend that money on ourselves. And there is nothing selfish about that. It's hardly surprising that the EU elite want to keep us in when we are such a big net contributor. And we hear about trade, another big choice on the ballot paper. We hear a lot about trade and how terrible it will be. Nobody wants to trade with the United Kingdom outside of the European Union. But how wrong they are. Because we produce great products in this country. Great products that we export all over the world. And at the moment, we run a £68 billion trade deficit with the European Union, but our trade with the rest of the world is a £31 billion surplus. And so they ask, the Remain side asks us what it will look like outside the European Union. The answer is very simple. It's like the £31 billion surplus we run with the rest of the world. It's exactly what we have, and it will continue to grow. And at the same time, nothing whatsoever will change in terms of our trading relationship with the EU, because it would simply be slitting the throats of French champagne manufacturers, of German car manufacturers. I mean, really, come on. Do you honestly think that the German car manufacturers aren't going to want to sell Mercedes, BMWs and Audis to British consumers on exactly the same terms? And what I think will happen is on the 24th of June, the German car manufacturers will be banging down Angela Merkel's door saying you have to sign some trade agreements with the United Kingdom on exactly the same terms that we've got now. And I think another issue in relation to trade, and this is one that's been skated over all too often as part of this debate, is that at the moment we are part of a customs union that keeps poor people poor in the developing world. I think that is a national disgrace. I think we should be ashamed of ourselves that we are part of a customs union that levies tariffs of 200% on poor farmers in developing countries. That is frankly outrageous. It is a travesty. And I hear Labour MPs on the other side of the House talk about fairness, talking about progressive politics. Well, let me tell you, there is nothing progressive whatsoever about keeping poor people poor in the developing world. We can do more trade with those countries outside of the European Union. We can get rid of those barriers. That will be good for jobs in those countries. It will be good for jobs in this country. And most of all, we all know that trade is a much better solution than sticking plaster at. Final thing, I just want to go back to our democracy, because a lot has been said about this, but I do think that Boris is right when he makes the argument. This is the fundamental issue on the ballot, the fundamental choice that we've got. Because Remain try to make out that only 13% of our laws are handed down to us by Brussels, but the Independent House of Commons Library has said that the figure is more like 75%. It is an enormous amount. I mean, come on, we can't even say that we're going to get rid of the tampon tax without going with our begging bowl to the European Union to ask for permission. And I think we've heard now that after them saying that they were going to review this and put a stop to it, they're now walked away from it. And we keep hearing that we've got all this influence. David Cameron was saying the other night in the debate that we're going to have more reform. Well, hang on a moment. We got no reform when the fifth largest economy in the world was threatening to walk. So if we vote to remain here, what bargaining power do we have whatsoever to leverage any more from the EU? Enough is enough. It really is. And what's brought that home to me in particular is as an MP who represents the steel town. And I'm incredibly proud to represent it. Our steel-making history goes back decades. It's a town built on steel, and we're proud of it, incredibly proud of it. But you should see the nonsense that we've had to go through in recent months to try and get the help that the industry needs. As part of the APPG, I work cross-party with SNP colleagues, with Labour colleagues. We put aside our political differences and we try to do the right thing by our steel industry. And to the credit of ministers, they too have tried to get help for the industry. But the problem has been, for example, in relation to the energy compensation package that we so desperately need, we put the request in because we have to have state aid approval from the European Union. So again, we have to have our begging bowl out to go to the Commission to go and ask to provide help to our industries. There was a 50-day delay between putting that application in and getting the result. It cost £6.2 million to our steel industry. And the problem was that I knew all the way through that it was getting more and more difficult for Tata by the week. And so it was hardly a huge surprise a few months ago when we heard that they were going to sell their UK portfolio. But how can it be right that we have to go with our begging bowl to ask for help for our industries? And we're now here, and this is coming from somebody who said actually, very clearly on the record, it's not necessarily a strong conservative principle, but I believe you've got to do the right thing by your industries. And if we have to have a short period of public ownership to facilitate a fire, that is exactly what we should do. And I've been criticised, that's not very free marketing. But actually, our steel industry is to treat clean water. We have to have a steel industry in this country. It's so vital. But what we're now hearing is that state aid rules might again get in the way of finding a buyer. How can this be right? And what I say very clearly, and I've said this to ministers, and this is kind of aside from this referendum issue, is that if EU state aid rules get in the way, we should simply ignore them and do what's right by our industries. But it does show how MPs in the House of Commons and how government ministers in their departments cannot do the things that we need to do in our national interest. And so we have to get our democracy back, lock, stock and barrel. I just want to again go back to what I said at the start. An enormous thank you for everything that you've been doing. And this is a really important fortnight that we've got ahead of us to win this vote. And there are a lot of undecided people out there still. A lot of people still making their mind up. And I know that if Kate Hoey was here, who's one of our co-founders, she would say that you've got to grab hold of the person next to you in the deli queue at Sainsbury's or Waitrose or wherever you go to shop and talk to them about how important this vote is. Because it's going to be word of mouth. Getting the arguments across is going to be so important. And a constituent of mine put it to me like this a few weeks ago, and it was touched on in her first opening speech. And that is, if people haven't made their mind up, ask them, if this referendum was about joining the European Union, would you vote to join? And I think the vast majority of people, in fact, I've only seen one person who thinks it's a good idea to vote to join the European Union. I'm ashamed to say that's my Prime Minister. But look, I can't find a single person in my constituency and on the trip that we're making around the country to spread the word who thinks that it would be a good idea to join the European Union on the terms that we've currently got. And so put that question to them. Because if their answer is no, I wouldn't vote to join, then as a consequence of that, surely you wouldn't possibly vote to stay in. And we keep hearing about risk. We keep hearing about risk, how it's so risky to vote to stay in. We hear from the other side about the risks of leaving. But to me, it is so much more risky to vote to stay in because you know the direction of travel. My constituents tell me that in the 1970s, I wasn't around, that they were. They voted for a free trade common market agreement. They didn't vote for a political superstate. And we're way on the way to that direction of travel. The Eurozone means that they are going to need to integrate more politically in order for it to succeed. And the idea that you can write down on this paper that we're going to be exempt from it, we're not going to be affected by it, is for the birds. Because the consequence of that closer political integration that it is going to require means that we are going to be sucked into measures whether you like it or not. We've also got expansion, EU enlargement, bringing Turkey into the European Union, other states into the European Union. What's that going to do to our economy? What is that going to have in terms of impact on our immigration system? These are all enormous risks. And why be shackled to what is the diminishing market, rapidly diminishing market, when we ought to be engaging more with the Chinas, with the Indias, and with the developing world? That is the responsible thing to do. That is the safer thing to do. So we should get out. And so my plea to you is this, that in these final few days, I know everyone in this room is doing everything they can to try and win this referendum, but we know how on a knife edge this vote is. And imagine how we will feel if we wake up on the 24th of June and the result is 51% to stay in and 49% to leave. I don't think we'll ever forgive ourselves because our one chance will have gone. And so when you've been out canvassing for couple of hours, starting at 5 and it gets to 7 and you want to go home for your dinner or you want to go down the pub for a pint and you want to go home for a cup of coffee, please just sum up the energy and the enthusiasm just to do that extra street. Because if all of us take that responsibility and do that extra street in every constituency, it may well just make the difference come polling day. And the reason that that is so important is because we know that we are good enough, we know that we are strong enough, and we know that we are significant enough. And that is why we have to get our great country out of the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't seem that policemen are getting younger. It seems that members of Parliament are getting younger. And he is, of course, Tom is a son of himself. If Kate was here, Kate Hogan, she would also point out that the month she got elected to Parliament was the same month that Tom was born. Not only are we cross-party, we're cross-aged as well. I've got some good news and some bad news. I'll start with the good news. T-shirts, ties, hoodies. Actually, someone's modelling a hoodie. Do you understand? There are these delightfully conservative. And there's pens and key rings and badges. And please take them. They're all free. The idea is the more people that wear these, the more people got badges on before polling day, it helps. Now these things, after polling day, will work for you, I'm sure. They are the most remarkable ties. But please, when you go, we have a clear mark policy. We never take anything back. So please take all the freebies from the table. So when you leave. The bad news is behind that table there are a number of boxes. Each of those boxes has 400 leaflets in them. They're a cross-party leaflet. There's a section from Dr. Liam Fox, Conservatives, Kate Hogan from Labour, Nigel Farage from UKIP. Please, if you could take a box or two and just deliver them in your local area. They're a brand new leaflet, there's a million of them being printed, and I just think, as Tom said, we've just got to do that extra little bit to try and get this. I mean, I think we're at the head of the moment. I just think we've got to stay there and just do that extra bit to win. Now, this is the moment that I get to introduce our UKIP speaker. I normally have to start by putting the fear of God into it by saying, I had a chat with Nigel this morning and he's asked me to mark him out of 10, or whatever the speaker is. But because Nathan is so well known and actually a real star within UKIP, I don't need to do that. One of the strange things that we had not expected, Tom and I, when we started this venture, was to see things through different people's eyes. We always saw things through a Conservative vision. We now have to look at it through a Labour vision and a UKIP vision. And that's been one of the great things about working together. Grassroots now puts party politics to one side. We'll put it like this, until after the 23rd of June. Then we'll be nasty to each other again. But before then, we're all friends. And it has been an absolute eye-opener how so many different people are willing to put their party politics to one side. To think, Tom, that we'd be lined up with Dennis Skinner. But Dennis is passionate about leaving the EU as we are. Now, I'll go back to Nathan. Nathan is MEP, now the Senator now. He has been one of the most helpful people in UKIP for Grassroots now. The help we've had from Wales has been absolutely terrific, and there's no little. It is a fact, Nathan, and it's largely through you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll give you our UKIP, and I forgot to tell him, we're on a 10-minute limit tonight, we're doing a question now. Nathan, thank you very much.
Nobody told me there was a 10-minute limit, I may not have driven it. Somebody needs to tell the Prime Minister that the floods that he promised after we vote Brexit have started already. I think it's a good sign. One of my colleagues was in Ceredigion yesterday when they were opening the postal roads, and he called me, couldn't wait to call me to tell me what he had observed. Now, if you know Ceredigion, it is the most Europhile county in Britain. I mean, they just love the EU for some bizarre reason. He said as they were opening them, they were putting them into bundles of 25s.
I'm just going to point out to Nathan, we have a member of the press here tonight, and we would not like to break in any way the Official Secrets Act. This is an assumption that Nathan's about to say.
Absolutely. They were putting them into bundles of 25s. And he said in one bundle, there'd be 15 to read. In the next bundle, there'd be 15 or 16 to read. And it was going from bundle to bundle like that. And in his assumption, there was only a marginal lead for Brunei. Now, you may think, but actually, no, it's not. It's because this is the most Europhile county in Britain. And if they haven't got this huge leap ahead already in the postal votes there, we're going to win this. We are absolutely going to win this, and you can put that down. I think it's quite fortuitous that we are in this room with this huge picture behind us. Because what we know from the Battle of Agincourt was that there was about between 6,000 and 9,000 Britons. There were Welshmen there, the Archers, there were Englishmen, there were Scots, and there were even Irish there. And they faced the wrath of the French, who had been following them for days and days and days. And they had this great showdown. And the French were just so cocky because they had all of these huge war horses and their wonderful armour that was made in Milan, and the British bows would just bounce off it. There was going to be no problem whatsoever. But what did we learn from our most famous of those? That a few good men, that thin red line, will always win when your hearts are strong and your cause is good. And I assure you that we have the best cause of any political movement ever in British history. Because what are we fighting for? I heard on the radio the other day that somebody said that if we vote to leave, that we are betraying those men and women who fought and died in the First and Second World War because they fought and died for peace. And I thought to myself, well, hold on. If they wanted peace, we wouldn't have got entangled in these two European wars in the first place, would we? They didn't fight and die for peace. They did it for the British way of life, and they did it for our democracy and for our sovereignty. And every single generation in this nation's history has had to fight for our democracy and our sovereignty in one way or another. They did it in a very real way, didn't they? With bullets whizzing around the rooms, and it was quite bloody and horrible. But this is no less of a fight. This is no less of a battle. This is our moment to shine. This is our thin red line. And just look around. How many of us are here? And thank heavens there's some young people. But the majority of you are older. I'm 42, so I'm not sure I'm there. I'm old. These guys think I'm old. I still think I'm a bit young, but in any case, this is it. This is our battle. And we're going to win it. Because we have to win it. Because if we don't, that's it. It's game over. I want to show you something. Now, Nigel does this all the time. He pulls out the passport and says, it says on the top there, European Union. And what he doesn't do is actually show you the real European Union passport. This is a bona fide, absolutely real EU passport. They exist. They exist. Are you kidding me? When we voted to leave on the 23rd, this is going in my little museum of stuff. Did you watch the debate last night? Yes. There was the 3 witches from Monmouth. Goodness me, didn't they just turn you off politics altogether? It was just horrendous. Especially that Eagle woman, and again you can put on. I mean, I was watching it with my wife, and she was just like, who are these people? Couldn't they find anybody better? And actually, you know what? No. They couldn't. I had a debate in Dundalk Wells or somewhere, but they couldn't even find anybody to debate against me. We had to cancel it. And this is what we're up against. It's great. It's absolutely brilliant, isn't it? But for me, the moment of the night was when Giselle, thank you. When she said in her closing statement with passion, you could feel it, didn't you? You could see it with passion. She said, I'm not from this country, but I believe in this country. And we're not voting for this outer darkness being cast away, adrift, and all of the doom and gloom and plague of locusts and all the rest. You know, that's just stupidity and rubbish. Voting because ultimately you and I believe in something so much greater than each of us as individuals. We believe in this wonderful country that we were blessed to be born in. Or if you come here, you move here like my wife, blessed to move here and live in. And it's because we believe in what our forefathers through decades and centuries passed on to us, and what we too must pass on to our children and to our great grandchildren, hopefully one day we live on to enjoy that. And I know, and I believe very strongly, that ultimately right is right, and that truth will always out in the end. And whenever we have these debates, and whenever we confront them, I can't wait, I love it, I absolutely love it, because it's not like when we're politically against each other, you know, and you're arguing about this point or that point or whatever. We're arguing about our country. And we're arguing about whether or not we believe it's good enough, and we're good enough. And I had an experience in the European Parliament when, an AM, a member of the Welsh Assembly, quite a few of them came over, and they wanted to see the Welsh MEPs. And the number one question they had was, when is the referendum going to be? So I was like, June. I was actually right. Is it June? I said, June. Yeah, that's my, like as if we knew, as if anybody knew it was going to be MEP-wise. And then we were talking, and there was discussing things, and I kept on throwing in all of this stuff about how we're going to win the referendum, we're going to win. And this Labour AM was getting more and more. And in the end, he said to me, and this is the honest truth, he said, we need the EU to make our laws for us because we don't have the expertise to make our laws. That's what some, not all of the political class, but some of our political class truly believe that we have descended to. And I did that, I was in Shire on Monday, and it was Morgan. She said something to the effect of, good luck making all of these trade deals when we leave, because we haven't made a trade deal in 40 years, and we've got no expertise in making trade deals. And I said, well, shame on us, first of all, as the 5th largest economy in the world. And you know what, if we had to bring in a Canadian to run the Bank of England, I'm sure we can bring a bit of expertise if we really are that bad. But ultimately, as because I know time's moving on, and it's hot in here, and you all want to go out and deliver leaflets, I can tell. But ultimately, for me, it's like what was said last night. It's not about the 55 million pounds a day, or the 350 million a week, or the 250 million a week, or whatever it is you want to call it. It's not about that. It's not about the crazy bent banana laws, is it? And it's not about the open borders and the fact we have no idea how many houses to build or how many school places we need, because we're just not in control. It's not about that. It's about who runs my country. Is it people that we can vote out, that we can sack because they're rubbish and we don't like the laws that they've made? Or is it these unelected, champagne-drinking bureaucrats in Brussels and Strasbourg who, believe you me, are making our laws right now? I know we're good. I know that my grandfather and great-grandfather did not do what they did in the 2 world wars so that this generation could forever sign away the freedom and the, not only freedom, but the sovereignty of this nation. We are not a star in another nation's flag, and we most definitely will never be, and should never be, a province within the United States of